Hi, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Today really is an important day as we announce the next step in our government's plan to support Canadians through this pandemic. As the Prime Minister said several weeks ago, our plan includes a seamless transition to EI, coupled with the creation of new benefits to ensure that no Canadian worker is left behind. Notre objectif pendant cette transition entre l'urgence et la reprise est d'apporter aux travailleurs canadiens la certitude et le confort sur lequel ils pourront compter à plus long terme. Quelle que soit l'étape ou la phase de reprise dans laquelle se trouve la collectivité, nous ne laisserons personne de côté. We also recognize that there continues to be an ongoing public health crisis in our country, and we need to prepare for other possible economic shutdowns due to outbreaks or future COVID-19 waves. Not all regions across the country or sectors are reopening at the same time, and this has had a direct impact on our businesses, on the availability of work, and on people's jobs. The reopening of daycares and back-to-school plans also vary significantly across the country, and parents are worried about both the health and safety of their kids, as well as their own availability for work. There's no denying that the Canada Emergency Response Benefit has helped millions of Canadians. Canadians have confidence in this program. It's been a lifeline for many people and has been monumental in our country's efforts to slow the spread of the virus, keeping Canadians safe and supporting our economy. To provide certainty and continuity, we are announcing today that Canadians will have access to an additional 4 weeks of CERB for a total of 28 weeks. For Canadian families who rely on the CERB, this means that they'll be supported as they figure out what's happening with school and daycare for their kids in the fall. I'll now share with you the details of our transition from the CERB to EI, which will come into effect on September 27th. To begin, because of the impact of COVID-19 and because of the impact it had on the job market, we recently set a minimum national unemployment rate of 13.1% to standardize access to EI regular benefits across the country. This set the eligibility criteria for EI regular benefits at the lowest entry threshold possible. But even doing this, we know many Canadian workers will still not have the hours required to be eligible for EI. That's why we're announcing today a one-time top-up of insurable hours to Canadians applying for EI regular and special benefits. Canadians accessing regular benefits for job loss will receive a credit of 300 hours, and Canadians accessing special benefits, including sickness, maternity, and parental benefits, will receive a credit of 480 hours. This means that millions of Canadians will only need 120 hours to access any EI benefit. I want to highlight the importance of these changes for expectant and new parents, mothers in particular. Many parents have not been able to accumulate the work hours necessary to claim EI maternity or parental benefits. With this one-time credit of 480 insurable hours, parents will have access to these benefits. And we're making this credit retroactive so that parents can claim these benefits starting March 15th, 2020. This one change alone will make a big difference in the lives of many Canadians. Depuis le premier jour, notre gouvernement s'est engagé à traiter tous les travailleurs de manière juste et équitable. Et la démarche de relance économique que nous adoptons n'est plus différente. Nous savons que malgré les mesures dont je viens de parler, il y a toujours des Canadiens qui n'auront pas assez d'heures de travail pour avoir droit à l'assurance emploi ou qui ne relèvent pas du régime d'assurance emploi, comme les travailleurs indépendants et les travailleurs à la demande. For those workers, we are announcing the creation of 3 new benefits. First, the Canada Recovery Benefit for self-employed workers and workers not eligible for EI in the amount of $400 per week. Second, the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit for eligible Canadians who are unable to work because they need to provide care or support for a child, family member, or dependent in the amount of $500 per week. And third, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit for workers who are unable to work because they are sick or have to self-isolate for reasons related to COVID-19 in the amount of $500 per week. Both the recovery benefit and the caregiving benefit will be available for up to 26 weeks over a 1 year period, and the sickness benefit will be available for 2 one-week periods over the year. We intend to introduce legislation in the first week of our return to Parliament to create these benefits and ensure that Canadians have the financial support they need. For the millions of Canadian workers who will have access to EI because of these changes, we want to assure you that there will be equity between the EI program and the recovery benefits. We'll be establishing a minimum EI benefit amount of $400 per week to ensure that no one on EI is receiving less than someone receiving the recovery benefit. En étant de la système de l'assurance emploi, vous aurez accès à des possibilités de formation, des incentives au travail et la possibilité de travailler pendant une période de prestation. For Canadian workers receiving the recovery benefit, we will work to ensure that you too have access to training, and will introduce a modified working while on claim approach to earned income while on the benefit. Nous savons que les Canadiens sont impatients de retourner au travail. Déjà, plus de 4,1 millions de personnes de la PCU sont retournées sur le marché du travail, et nous nous attendons à ce qu'il y ait encore tous les mois dans les mois à venir. Nous allons continuer d'être là pour tous les travailleurs canadiens. With the additional weeks of CERB, the transition to EI, the uniform unemployment rate and credit of insurable hours, and the creation of 3 new recovery benefits, we're doing our very best to support all Canadian workers and leave no one behind. Thank you very much. Madame?
Thank you, Carla. Bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, our government has had 2 overarching objectives. First, to protect and preserve the lives and health of Canadians. And second, to protect and preserve Canadian businesses, Canadian jobs, and our economy. 2 programs, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, have been the bedrock of our economic response. These programs have allowed tens of thousands of employers to continue paying their furloughed workers and to keep people working who may otherwise have lost their jobs. And they've allowed millions of workers who've lost their jobs due to COVID-19 to keep supporting their families and to help pay for things like groceries and the rent. Reuters today published a story with the headline, Canada's economic growth seen outpacing US as virus containment pays off. The fact is that by doing the right thing to protect our health, we are also supporting our economy. And the inverse is also true. By supporting Canadians who are out of work because of the pandemic, we are making it possible for our country to continue to practice social distancing and to do the right thing in the fight against the coronavirus. As we shift from our initial emergency response to a safe and prudent restart, as we shift to living with COVID-19, our approach also needs to evolve. And that's why Minister Qualtrough and I, Carla and I, are here today. In addition to the new benefits she has just described and that she's been working on for a while, we are also announcing reforms to employment insurance. EI is critical to our economy. Canadians rely on this program to get through difficult times when they've lost their jobs through no fault of their own. EI also provides support for workers who must temporarily leave their jobs in order to take care of a child, care for a loved one, or retrain. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, many workers have lost their jobs or worked greatly reduced hours, which might make them ineligible for EI. We recognize that, so we're going to make it easier for Canadians to get EI support. À compter du 27 septembre,
un crédit dur assurable, temporaire et unique aidera les Canadiens à accéder aux prestations d'assurance emploi. Ce crédit s'appliquera également rétroactivement aux demandeurs de prestations parentales, de maternité, de compassion, d'aidants familiaux ou de travail partagé d'assurance emploi qui n'ont pas établi le démonte du prestation du 15 mars 2020 au 26 septembre 2020 en raison de ne pas avoir travaillé suffisamment d'heures. Cela signifie que la majorité des Canadiens qui ont travaillé pendant la période de qualification recevront l'assurance d'emploi. Ceci fera en sorte que plus de Canadiens recevront l'assurance d'emploi d'une manière conforme à travers le pays. De plus, nous gelerons le taux de cotisation à l'assurance d'emploi des 2 prochaines années au niveau de 2020. Cela signifie que les travailleurs continueront à bénéficier des cotisations à l'assurance d'emploi à un niveau qu'elle était en 2020, soit $1,58 par $100 des gains assurables. C'est le plus bas niveau depuis 1980. De plus, le taux de cotisation des employeurs sera gelé à $2,21 par $100 de gains assurables. Cette mesure stimulera une croissance économique majeure. Grâce à ce gel, au cours des 2 prochaines années, les travailleurs et les employeurs épargneront au total plus de $2 milliards.
Beginning September 27th, a temporary one-time credit of insurable hours will help Canadians claim EI benefits. This credit will also apply retroactively to claimants for EI maternity, paternal, compassionate care, family caregiver, or work-sharing benefits who could not establish their claim for EI from March 15, 2020 to September 26, 2020 due to not having worked enough hours. Very simply, this means that most Canadians who worked during the qualifying period will now be able to claim EI. We are also going to freeze EI premium payments at 2020 levels for 2 years. That means workers will continue to benefit from the employment insurance premium rate at the 2020 level of $1.58 per $100 of insurable earnings, the lowest level since 1980. The rate for employers will also be frozen at $2.21 per $100 of insurable earnings. That is also the lowest level since 1980. This measure in and of itself constitutes a significant economic boost. The total savings to workers and employers, thanks to this freeze, are estimated to be greater than $2 billion over 2 years. This will make it easier for Canadian businesses and for Canadian workers to get back to work in this difficult time. We want to encourage Canadian businesses to hire back their workers rather than to spend their money paying higher EI premiums. And Canadian businesses, please use this saved money to hire back some of your excellent and beloved workers. So let's be clear. We have had some success at flattening the curve of the pandemic, but we're not out of the woods yet. And we are contending with the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. At the beginning of this crisis, our government promised to do whatever it takes to support Canadian workers and to support Canadian businesses. That is what we're doing today and what we promise to continue to do. Thank you very much. Carl and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, merci. We'll now proceed to questions from the media. We'll start with 3 questions on the phone, then take questions in the room. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator, over to you.
Thank you, merci. Our first question is from Jordan Press from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
Well, hi, good afternoon, ministers. I wanted to just ask, you're making these changes that are going to put a heavy burden, first off, on the EI system, and also are only going to be in place, really, as you say, for about 1 year. So I'm curious if, first, the EI system can actually handle all of this for the next year, and if you're essentially saying that after this year is over, that things are going to be better, and maybe we won't need these changes anymore.
Thank you for the question, Jordan. We have spent the last 3.5, 4 months preparing the EI system for this very moment. We learned very quickly in March that the EI system couldn't take in the number of applicants we were looking at supporting. And I am absolutely confident now, after having automated a bunch of our processes, simplified others, and streamlined others, that the EI system is more than ready to take in the approximate 3 million people we believe will go into the EI system at the end of September.
Follow-up?
And so just as a follow-up, just to go back on then, for the 1-year time frame, can you just explain why this is only going to be in place for 1 year and not maybe for longer, given that there's some estimates that we could still be in a recovery beyond the end of next year?
Really important question, Jordan. Thank you. So we have put in place the 1-year time frame to give Canadians a longer view of the support they'll be receiving. We've been announcing CERB extensions in additional weeks, kind of around the 2 to 4 month mark. And we recognize that Canadians can now benefit from more certainty and more continuity. We don't know what the world's going to look like in a year. And part of what you'll hear in our speech from the throne on the 23rd and what I've been tasked to do by the Prime Minister is to look at what's been identified within the EI system as significant systemic gaps and to look at designing or changing the system to better respond to the way Canadians work now and the way we anticipate they'll continue to work in the future. If there's anything this pandemic has shown us is that our EI system hasn't kept up with the way work has evolved, and we now have a chance to fix that for the better. OK, on a choisi de 1 an à la période de temps pour laquelle nous laissons ces prestations disponibles aux Canadiens parce que nous savons que les Canadiens méritent une plus long temps de certitude pour leur vie. Nous savons que peut-être, on ne sait pas ce que le monde va rassembler dans 1 an, mais nous savons que maintenant, notre système d'assurance d'emploi ne travaille pas pour tous les Canadiens, pour tous les travailleurs. Et la manière dont nous travaillons au Canada, ça ne suivit pas le système d'assurance-emploi. C'est le système que nous avons maintenant et nous l'utilisons de la maximum capacité et c'est vraiment prêt pour ingester tous les travailleurs, à peu près 3 millions, qui vont être dans le système dans 1 mois. Mais nous savons que nous pouvons faire mieux et que nous pouvons changer le système pour incorporer plus de travailleurs et être plus inclusif.
More workers and be more inclusive. Merci. Opérateur, nous allons prendre la prochaine question. Operator will now take the next question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question vient de Michel Lamarche de TVA. À vous la parole.
Michel Lamarche.
Oui, bonjour. Très rapidement, Madame Qualtrough, vous venez de parler de 3 millions de travailleurs dans le système dans 1 mois. Si on prend en considération qu'il y a actuellement encore sur la PCU 4,5 millions de Canadiens, qu'est-ce qui vous fait dire là, que dans 1 mois, on est à 3 millions? Ça pourrait être beaucoup plus.
Excuse la confusion. Ce que je voulais dire, qu'il y a maintenant 4,5 millions de personnes dans la PCU. À peu près 3 millions de ces personnes vont entrer dans le système d'assurance-emploi. Les autres 1,2 à 5 millions de personnes vont être dans la nouvelle prestation de la relance économique. Alors, nous espérons, nous pensons que toutes les 4,5 millions de personnes vont être couvertes, mais soit par l'assurance-emploi, à peu près 3 millions, soit avec les nouvelles prestations, 1 à 1,5 millions de personnes.
Suivi. Follow-up.
Bien sûr. Vous aurez donc pour les prestations spéciales à faire passer une loi au Parlement en revenant après le discours du trône. Expliquez-nous ce qui se passe si vous perdez lors du discours du trône, que vous n'obtenez pas la confiance des partis d'opposition. Il n'y a pas de programme pour des millions de Canadiens, c'est ça?
There's no program for millions of Canadians, then?
Nous avons beaucoup de confiance qu'après avoir travaillé très proche avec les partis d'opposition sur la PCU et la PCU étudiant, que nous allons atteindre le consensus avec les autres partis. Tous les changements à l'assurance-emploi vont être faits, Il n'y a pas de législation pour ces 3 millions de personnes. Pour les autres personnes, bien sûr, nous allons essayer de trouver une autre façon, mais je ne pense pas que doit spéculer à ça. Nous avons travaillé de très proche avec les partis d'opposition sur les autres prestations. Nous sommes tous d'accord qu'on reste dans une crise de santé publique et économique. Alors, moi, j'ai beaucoup de confiance que nous pouvons trouver une manière de travailler ensemble sur cette loi. Thank you. What I basically said is I have confidence, having worked through this process with the opposition parties for the CERB and the student benefit, that we'll be able to find a way forward with the opposition parties who also recognize that this is an ongoing public health and economic crisis. I think they'll be pleased with the parameters of this program because I believe that the concerns they've raised with our existing programs have been addressed through the changes to this one. I think we don't have to worry about working together when we really need to, and we've shown that time and time again in this Parliament, despite the noise, that we all have the best interests of Canadians at heart.
Thank you. Operator, we'll take the next question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question is from Kim McCroom from the Wall Street Journal. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Can you provide cost estimates for the programs you're announcing today? How much will the additional month of CERB cost? How much will the 3 new programs cost? And how much will the expansion of EI benefits cost?
Thank you for the question. So extending the CERB by an additional 4-week period is estimated to cost approximately $8 billion. Of course, we don't know how many people will be in either of these systems because we, of course, are hoping that as people go back to work, we'll have less people, but we anticipate about an $8 billion cost for the extension of CERB. The 1-year program of the relaxed EI measures coupled with the 3 new benefits is estimated at being approximately $22 billion. And then just overall additional costs to the EI system proper are estimated at being an additional $7 billion. So by my math, and perhaps the finance minister can correct me, I think that's about $37 billion.
And I would just add there, Kim, that as I mentioned in my remarks, by freezing the EI premium rate, we will be foregoing about $2 billion over 2 years that workers and employers would have paid in EI premiums. As I said, we do that very consciously, very intentionally, and we're glad to do it. We think that now is not the time to be discouraging businesses from bringing on new workers. Quite the contrary, we want them to be hiring, and with this action, we're trying to give them a little boost.
Thank you. Follow-up?
That's okay. Thanks.
All right, we'll now take questions from the room. David.
On September 23rd, Parliament will come back. On September 27th, legislation costing, $39 billion in total will be tabled. Massive overhauls to EI. And I'm assuming you're going to put a gun to the opposition head again to get them to pass this quick with modified rules. To the Deputy Prime Minister, why are you showing such contempt for parliamentarians to put such a package before them, hold a gun to their heads saying Canadians can't get this stuff until you vote in favor of our deal?
Well, thank you for the question, David. And let me first say I do not believe that putting forward legislation in Parliament should be referred to. I would never refer to it using militaristic metaphors. We are very clearly and with a lot of notice to Canadians and to our counterparts on the other side of the House, laying out what we believe is the right thing to do for Canadians as a government. And I am really confident that the right thing to do is to give all members of Parliament the right to speak for their constituents, to vote in the House, and to say to Canadians, do they support these measures or not? That is a really democratic approach, and that's why we're taking it.
Of course, a really democratic approach would have put legislation before the House for MPs to do that this week. Instead, your government chose to prorogue and eliminating what would have been a good month of healthy debate and discussion by all MPs. Let me ask you a question as the finance minister now. Again, contempt for Parliament by not putting forward a budget for this year before the House. Will you commit to putting a budget before the House before the October 31st and allow that budget be debated in its normal, fulsome manner and be examined by committees? Can you commit to that?
So, David, I have been finance minister for less than 49 hours. And so I am not going to make any grand policy pronouncements today. But let me say one thing clearly to Canadians, that in committing to giving a speech from the throne in a few weeks, our Prime Minister and our government are committing to lay out clearly for Canadians the course of action our government is intending to take, very much including in terms of economic policy. The measures that Carla and I have announced today are a part of that, and we really believe we owe it to Canadians, we owe it to members of Parliament to be clear about our plan and our strategy. This speech from the throne will lay that out, and then all members of Parliament will have a chance to deliver their verdict.
Thank you. Next question.
L'inaudible, la presse canadienne. Madame Freeland, sans métaphore militaire, j'aimerais que vous m'expliquiez quand même.
Merci, Lina.
Parce que je ne les connais pas.
Pourquoi
pourquoi vous n'avez pas attendu de proroger après la séance du 26 août? Pourquoi ne pas avoir présenté ces trois prestations qui ont besoin d'être adoptées en loi avant le 26 août, donc, plutôt que plus tard en septembre?
Je vais répondre, peut-être Carla voudra ajouter quelque chose après. Pour nous, les changements qu'on a annoncés aujourd'hui font une partie intégrale de notre stratégie économique et notre stratégie sociale. Et nous pensons que c'est juste d'être clair avec les Canadiens, d'être clair avec les députés et de lui donner une opportunité de voter oui ou non pour un plan qui inclura évidemment ces changements. Nous sommes très transparents. Nous avons donné une briefing aux journalistes au niveau technique. Carla a expliqué en détail les changements qu'on proposera. Et j'espère que tous les députés, que tous les Canadiens vont étudier en détail nos programmes et j'espère qu'ils vont les appuyer.
Support them. Carla. Il y avait un choix pour nous aujourd'hui. Soit on annonce seulement les 4 semaines additionnelles de la PCU, ou soit on donne aux Canadiens la vision et l'assurance nous allons continuer à leur soutenir après le fin de septembre. On a choisi de donner les détails de nos plans, même si on ne peut pas les législer, parce que jusqu'au fin de septembre, parce que ça fait partie du plus grand vision de notre Premier ministre et notre gouvernement, car franchement, le monde n'est pas la même qu'il y a 8 mois. Et ce dont nous parlons il y a un an n'est plus même dans nos têtes, franchement. Alors, nous voulons que les travailleurs savent que nous allons continuer de leur soutenir et c'est la raison pour laquelle nous donnons les détails aujourd'hui.
We are giving more details today to give them more certainty.
Ça explique quand même pas pourquoi vous ne pouviez pas adopter ces prestations-là avant de proroger le Parlement, parce que vous aviez une occasion. Bref, on va laisser tomber ça. Vous avez été beaucoup critiqué sur la PCU parce qu'on ne pouvait pas travailler et tout en remboursant 50 cents pour $1. Bon, cette nouvelle prestation-là de la relance économique, est-ce que c'est une admission, vu qu'il y a le 50 cents pour le dollar? Est-ce que c'est une admission que c'était une erreur? Et si je peux ajouter aussi, vous comptez encore une fois sur l'honnêteté des citoyens, vous faites les 3 nouvelles prestations. Est-ce que c'est sage de supposer que non, les gens ne frauderont pas et s'ils seront vraiment malades quand ils iront chercher leurs 1000 piastres?
There's a concern of fraud, that they'll be using it fraudulently.
Those are a lot of questions. Well, frankly, nous
croyons dans l'honnêteté des Canadiens. Nous pensons vraiment que les Canadiens veulent travailler. Les autres membres des autres partis, comme les conservateurs, pensent que les Canadiens préfèrent rester chez eux. Mais ce n'est pas notre opinion des Canadiens. Nous avons créé un système avec le PCU qui ne pouvait pas avoir les nuances de travailler à 50 sous, de retenir 50 sous par dollar. On a trouvé une façon de la faire après beaucoup de travail avec les officiels de nos départements. Alors, ça va être un meilleur système qui est plus proche à l'assurance d'emploi, mais on ne pouvait pas la faire il y a 2-3 mois, mais on peut le faire maintenant.
And can you just repeat that in English, please?
Sure. I said fundamentally we believe that Canadians are honest and that they want to work. There are other parties who think Canadians would prefer to stay at home, but we think that recent labor market data shows just the opposite. When jobs are available, Canadians will take them because they want to work and provide for their families. When we designed the CERB, it was clunky, and we didn't have systemic capability to have a sophisticated system where we could pull back 50 cents of every dollar earned, and just like in the EI system, but we've managed to create that system moving forward for these new benefits. And it will allow us to not have the $1,000 drop-off like we have in the CERB. It will allow us to, it will allow Canadians to work and earn, and it will always be in Canadians' best interest to work, because every dollar they make, they will, they'll have to pay 50 cents up until the point of the maximum benefit they received. But it's very similar to EI. We did our very best in designing the system to parallel the EI system to the extent possible. It's not quite the same, but it's a lot closer and a lot more streamlined than the CERB was.
Rachel Haynes with CTV National News. My first question is about the she-covery, which a lot of people have been talking about over the past couple of months, as we've seen that women are a lot more affected by this pandemic when it comes to their employment. We do have the recovery caregiving benefit, which is likely going to impact women, but there doesn't seem to be any specific measure that is directed right to women in order to address the she-covery. So are there going to be more measures coming to address this and how women are being disproportionately affected, or is it only going to be this caregiving benefit?
Carla and I are both passionate about this. So Rachel, that is a really good question. And you're quite right that the caregiver benefit that Carla has spoken about will be helpful to all caregivers, and the reality is those are predominantly women. Carla also spoke about, and this was a very important point, that maternity and paternity leave, which has been a sore point for people qualifying for EI, that is taken care of in these measures announced today. And I think both of us are very pleased about that, and all Canadians will be. But I want to assure you, this is just the beginning of our focus on supporting women and families in this recovery. So watch this space. There is a lot more to come.
And Minister, do you have?
No, it struck me early on in this pandemic when someone observed that women have been both frontlined and sidelined by this pandemic, and it's really the truth. I think up here you have two senior cabinet ministers absolutely determined to make sure that women come out of this for the better, and we are going to, as a government, definitely continue along that vein moving forward. And as the Deputy Prime Minister said, there's definitely more to come on this regard.
And my next question is about the sickness benefit, which you say fulfills the promise under the Safe Restart Agreement about the 10 days of paid sick leave. Obviously, that is something that the NDP pushed for a lot and something that the government worked for with the NDP. Did you put that in there in order to ensure the NDP support, given that we are in the speech from the throne situation and there might have to be some negotiations played with the opposition parties?
This is a really good idea, one that we've committed to for a long time now, one that the Deputy Prime Minister worked with the provinces on through the Safe Restart, one that was championed by the Premier of my own province and businesses in BC for a long time. There's a general consensus that this is a really good idea, and that it helps workers who may be symptomatic or are worried that they might have COVID make their choice to not work a little bit easier. And that's the reason why we're doing it. And we are lucky that there are other politicians that agree with that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just add, our government has been very clear for a while that we really believe that paid sick leave is important for Canadians, full stop. And it's really important during a global COVID-19 pandemic. As Carla said, I'd like to thank John Horgan of BC for really promoting this, and also Brian Pallister of Manitoba. It's something we agreed on with the premiers and that we committed to as part of the Safe Restart. And as for the NDP, I believe that they are supportive of paid sick leave, and that's great. And I hope all members of the House of Commons will be. There was actually a piece in the Toronto Star, I think it was today, talking about how paid sick leave is an essential part of a country being able to muster an effective response to coronavirus, because only when you have sick leave can people stay home from work. And, you know, that we need people to stay home when they are unwell. Otherwise, we will have another huge outbreak. So paid sick leave is the humane thing to do. It's the right thing to do in all circumstances. And it's absolutely essential today for the health and safety of all Canadians.
Thank you. We will take 3 more questions on the phone before returning to the room. Operator, first question.
Thank you. Merci. La prochaine question est de Émilie Bergeron de l'agence Clean. À vous la parole. Oui, bonjour. Ma question est pour Madame Caltrow. Si j'ai bien compris, pour le décompte des 4 millions de personnes qui vont passer de la PCU au nouveau programme que vous annoncez à l'assurance emploi, il y a 1 million de personnes qui vont aller, que vous estimez qui vont aller aux nouvelles prestations. Mais si 1 million de personnes-là, vous parlez de certitude, comment peuvent-ils avoir de la certitude aujourd'hui, ces personnes-là, si ces 1 million de personnes-là dépendent d'un projet de loi qui n'est même pas encore déposé?
Bien sûr, nous estimons, nous savons qu'il y a à peu près 4,5 millions de personnes sur le PCU maintenant. Le plus grand nombre de personnes, c'était 8 millions, et nous avons à peu près 4,1 millions de personnes qui sont retournées à leur travail. Alors, c'est de bonnes nouvelles. Maintenant, nous savons dans nos systèmes, envers ces 4 millions de personnes qui sont maintenant éligibles, nous avons fait des estimes pour déterminer combien de ces personnes avec un numéro d'heures additionnelles, soit le 300, soit le 440, 80, excuse-moi, va être éligible pour l'assurance emploi. Bien sûr, c'est un estimé, mais c'est le plus proche que nous pouvons être à ce moment-là.
Suivi?
Follow-up.
Oui, ça répond pas à ma question. Ma question, c'est qu'est-ce que vous dites à ces personnes qui veulent avoir droit aux prestations de relance que vous annoncez aujourd'hui et qui ne savent pas s'ils vont y avoir droit parce que ça nécessite un projet de loi qui n'est pas encore adopté, et je vais aller avec ma relance parce que ça, c'était juste une répétition de ma question d'avant. Aussi, ma relance, c'est les justifications que les personnes vont devoir fournir aux 2 semaines. C'est quoi exactement qu'elles vont devoir fournir pour prouver qu'elles ont droit à ces mesures-là? Et on les a vus, les reportages sur des fraudes, des cas de fraude. Il y a des Canadiens qui se sont fait frauder. Qu'est-ce que vous dites à ces Canadiens-là qui se sont fait voler leur identité et la PCU a été réclamée en leur nom frauduleusement? Je veux bien qu'on croit en l'honnêteté des Canadiens, mais quel raffermissement il va y avoir dans les mesures de contrôle?
Merci encore pour les questions. Alors, nous travaillons très fort et de proche avec les autres membres des autres partis, les membres du Parlement, pour avoir cette nouvelle loi qui va créer ces nouvelles prestations. On doit le faire au fin de septembre. Nous avons aussi nos mesures d'urgence qui terminent au mois de septembre aussi. Il y a du travail à faire. Pour la fraude, la raison pour laquelle nous avons choisi 2 semaines au lieu de 4 semaines, c'est qu'on peut suivre les personnes plus proches. On va leur demander de attester qu'ils sont disponibles pour travailler beaucoup plus proche à la système d'assurance-emploi. On va avoir des mesures d'intégrité en arrière de la système jusqu'à l'Agence de revenu canadien est prête pour suivre les personnes, pour assurer les données dont ils attestent. Alors, bien sûr, nous croyons que les Canadiens sont honnêtes, mais aussi on va absolument poursuivre ceux qui font le fraude. Nous sommes dévoués à ça. Et franchement, le ministre de l'Agence revenu canadien est vraiment dévoué à ça.
The minister in charge of
Thank you. I'll remind everyone
CRA
it's one
is very
question, one
committed to
follow-up.
this.
Operator, we'll take the next question.
Thank you. The next question is from Kate Bolingaro from Bloomberg. Please go ahead.
Hello, my questions are for Minister Freeland. I have a question. Can you tell me if the $37 billion estimate is for 1 year, and if you anticipate the EI changes will be permanent?
Okay, well, that's actually a question in the first instance for Minister Qualtra, and I'll let her start, but I'm happy to follow up.
So the answer to your first question is yes. For this 12-month program, the estimate is $37 billion. But again, that will depend on how many Canadians access both the EI system as well as these new benefits, and how quickly and how regularly our economy recovers, which, quite frankly, we don't know. And so part of the reason we're putting in place this 1-year program is to give that assurance to Canadians. In terms of whether or not these changes will be permanent, it's too early to tell, I think, is the answer, the honest answer to that. We're going to look at the EI system, and we know advocates have been asking governments to make similar changes that we're making temporarily now and making them permanent. But these are really important conversations that we want to have with stakeholders, with businesses, with labor, with workers, with other levels of government. And this is the exact time to be having those conversations.
Follow-up, Kate?
Okay, now my question is for Minister Freeland. So Canada has currently cast aside its fiscal anchors, including losing its AAA rating with Fitch. For you as Finance Minister, would it matter if credit agencies downgrade Canada's rating?
So let me be very clear. Canada's economic performance during the economic crisis caused by the coronavirus has been very strong relative to our peers. And that strength has been because Canadians have been great. Canadians have been great about doing the right thing when it comes to responding to the healthcare challenge. And by flattening the curve, by doing the right thing on the coronavirus, we have actually reaped the economic benefit. You know, people sometimes are tempted to talk about how there are trade-offs between doing the right thing for the economy and doing the right thing when it comes to fighting the coronavirus. I think the international experience at this point is really, really clear. If you do the right thing to fight the coronavirus, in the medium term, you are going to have a stronger economy because you're going to flatten the curve and you are going to be able to end the lockdown and go back to work. And that is what we have been doing carefully and cautiously in Canada. Now, in order to be able to fight the coronavirus effectively, we've done something really, really paradoxical. We have asked Canadian workers to stay home, and we have asked Canadian businesses to close their doors. We have asked our economy to shut down. You can't ask people to do that and expect people to do that without providing them support. And so that's what we have done. We have supported Canadians. Our government, yes, has taken on more debt so that Canadians didn't have to take on more debt, and so that Canadians could survive while doing the right thing. Already, we are seeing a positive economic effect from doing that. But as Carla has said, as we hear Theresa Tam saying over and over, the coronavirus is still with us, and we still have to be cautious and careful, and we have to be realistic about the fact that the fight against the coronavirus isn't over. So the commitment that our government can make and will continue to make is that we will do whatever it takes to support Canadian workers, Canadian businesses in doing the right thing on the healthcare front. And as I said, we are already seeing that we are reaping economic benefits from that. Now, when it comes to rating agencies, when it comes to bond markets, when it comes to international investors, the reality is also that in recent months, we have seen an inflow of money into Canada. We have seen a strengthening Canadian dollar. These are not signs of a lack of faith in the Canadian economy, quite the contrary.
Thank you. Operator, we will now take the last question on the phone.
Thank you. Our last question is from Julie Gordon from Reuters. Please go ahead.
Hi there. Thank you, Minister. This is for Minister Freeland. We're talking about 4.2 million people here who remain out of work come September. Does it stay there or continue to fall over the rest of the fiscal year? And we've heard that not all Canadians who lost work will go back. So what's the number you're using as sort of the base, and when do we get there?
Well, thank you for the question. Look, when they swore me in as Minister of Finance, they didn't give me a crystal ball. And, you know, when it comes to our economy, we are certainly living in a time when it is foolhardy to be making predictions. And the reason for that is we simply do not know what course the coronavirus will take in Canada. And even more so, we do not know what course the coronavirus will take in other countries around the world. And as people know very well, Canada is a trading nation. And so to a great extent, we are exposed to how other countries are dealing with this health and economic challenge. What I can say is that the numbers so far in terms of Canadians getting back to work, I think have surprised us all on the upside. And I really want to thank Canadian businesses and thank Canadian workers for getting back to work. Carla has already spoken about the fact that when we put the CERB in place, we were absolutely certain that Canadians would use that benefit out of absolute necessity. And as soon as there were jobs available, we were sure that Canadians want to work and they would go back to work. That is what we are seeing, and we're really, really delighted about that. Having said that, I think we all recognize that the reality is that as long as the coronavirus is with us, we all need to take measures to protect our health and safety that impede a full return to the life we had before the coronavirus. That is having an effect on Canadian businesses. It's having an effect on the Canadian economy, and that means it's having an effect on Canadian jobs. And that's precisely why Carla and I are announcing these measures. I do want to say one other thing about the Canadian economy, which cheers me up a lot. And that is we do have sectors of our economy, particularly in areas like natural resources, forestry, like agriculture, where it is absolutely possible to continue to work and to continue to operate even in a socially distanced environment. I talked to my dad about farming. He's turning 76. I'm a little bit worried about his health. And he said, when I'm on my tractor, there's no one within 10 miles of me. I'm really okay. And if people look at our forestry industry right now with softwood lumber prices at historic record highs, there are parts of our economy that are doing really well. And that's fantastic. And I'm really, really grateful to the people, the really smart Canadians who work in those sectors.
Thank you. One follow-up?
Yes, thank you. My follow-up is actually for Minister Qualtrough. What is happening with the student benefit given the extremely high rate of unemployment among young people?
Well, at present time, the student benefit is set to expire in August, so it was a 4-month benefit for students to recognizing that they wouldn't have access to jobs necessarily this summer and that they may not have qualified for the CERB. If students are experiencing job loss or reduced hours because of COVID, they can access the CERB again for the next month. And we are creating tens of thousands of jobs for young people, and we've extended the duration of these job opportunities right through next February, in some cases through next May. So we're working really closely on our student measures. We have $8 billion in play right now in our student package. Super proud of that. But we know students, it's tough for students, and we're going to keep working for them and with them.
Thank you. We'll now take 3 last questions in the room. David? Yeah.
Okay. Hi. I'm just curious. What's the reason you're extending the CERB for another 4 weeks? Is it because of Parliament, and does it have anything to do with that?
A couple of reasons. So first of all, we wanted Canadians to have some certainty and some continuity. We know the uncertainty that September holds for so many Canadians, families, in particular parents and children going back to school or maybe not going back to school. And we also know that some people have continue to have access or CERB benefits waiting and still for them. We didn't want to have these benefits overlapping. We wanted to synchronize the transition to EI with the transition to new recovery benefits. We wanted to take the time to get this right, and all those things together meant it just made sense to do this all at the end of September.
Just clarification on that. Nothing to do with the proroguement of Parliament, and okay.
No, not at all.
Okay. And why not implement a universal basic income instead? And then what happens if we see a huge spike in coronavirus cases in the fall, as is quite probable? Will this new program that you're implementing now be able to capture the many Canadians who might have to go back into lockdown?
The answer to your second question is absolutely. And part of the reason we have created a uniform unemployment rate across the country is so that we can have some consistency in Canadians' ability to access EI very quickly. The way it usually works is there's a rolling unemployment rate that's set over a couple of months, and it takes the EI system 2 to 3 months to respond to spikes in unemployment. This way, we've set it for a year. Canadians have a minimum eligibility entry requirements. It's a guaranteed way that if there are outbreaks, as you say, or if there's a second wave, that immediately these systems will be able to take in Canadians who we ask to stay at home again if it comes to that. I'm sorry, I forget your first question. Yes, thank you, UBI. So, I've said this on a number of occasions, but we fundamentally believe that a targeted approach to helping people is better. We can give people more support and more direct support when we hone in on a group of people who need the help the most. So instead of giving every Canadian a little bit of money when every Canadian doesn't necessarily need it, we are focused with these benefits on Canadian workers in particular, and are able to give them more because of that choice, that real targeting of our measures.
Hi, Heather Schofield from the Toronto Star. So you've recognized that there's a conundrum with working parents at home trying to take care of their children and also trying to get back to work or working from home. But your response to that seems to be to give them income support to stay at home as opposed to getting back in the workplace. And why would you choose to go that way? And why not bolster childcare or work with the provinces to get safe schooling open right away rather than waiting weeks and weeks or for more money to get them back into the workforce so that and have their children well taken care of at the same time?
Well, my focus as employment minister has definitely been on working with business, working with provinces and territories, my colleagues, my other employment ministers on job creation and creating environments for everyone to be able to work. That's obviously, plan A. But the reality is that women in particular can't go back to work if their kids don't have daycare or preschool or school, especially K-12. And so we needed, like with the CERB, to have a benefit that covers situations of caregiving, and not just for students, or children, pardon me, but if you have a dependent, a senior dependent, and you provide elder care for a parent, if you have a son or daughter who's an adult with a disability that doesn't have access to their day program. These are very complicated situations for a number of Canadians that don't fall within the EI system. We don't have benefits for people in these circumstances, but COVID is creating these circumstances quite significantly, and we needed to have that backstop for everybody, but I'd say women in particular who provide the majority of care. And at the same time, the Deputy Prime Minister is working with provinces on the exact issues you talked about.
Yeah, that is a great question, Heather. And everything Carla says is right. As you know very well, because you've written about it, we have already put significant amounts of money into child care as part of the Safe Restart. But you're right that it is only a beginning and that it is not enough. And I think particularly as we look at back to school, and we look at the possibility that children in some parts of the country won't be back at school all the time, and also that before school and after school programs still face significant challenges. That is something that urgently we as a federal government, working with provincial governments, working with school boards, really need to get our arms around. I can tell you it's the only thing parents on my block are talking about. So I would just say to be continued and watch this space.
Just as a follow-up, the three new benefits that you've set up are $500 compared to the $400 that is the minimum for the enhanced DI. Is that not an invitation to game the system?
Well, to be clear, the recovery benefit is $400 and the caregiving and sickness are $500. So the recovery benefit, which is for job loss, straight out, will be the same as the minimum amount that someone can get in EI. There are some cases where, having done that, someone who's paid into the EI system for years could maybe be at $340 a week or $279, and it wasn't equitable to not give that worker the same amount of benefit as someone who had not paid into the EI system at all.
Thank you. We'll take the last question in the room, please.
Bonjour, c'est une question, surtout peut-être pour la ministre Freeland.
This is a question for Mr. Freeland.
Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada en passant.
Laurence from Radio-Canada.
Pourquoi est-ce que ce que vous annoncez aujourd'hui, ça marque vraiment, on pourrait dire, une nouvelle étape là, du gouvernement, de votre gouvernement dans votre lutte contre la COVID?
Government's fight against COVID.
Je dirais que pas exactement que c'est une nouvelle étape. Je dirais que c'est une continuation de ce qu'on a fait du début.
Of what we've been doing since the beginning.
Est-ce qu'il n'y a pas vraiment de changement?
Well, there's no real change.
C'est une amélioration.
It's an improvement.
C'est une adaptation.
It's
an
adaptation
étape
to the new phase that we are currently in.
On a commencé une relance prudente.
A safe recovery.
Et dans les circonstances d'une relance, on a la possibilité d'améliorer nos programmes. Il est plus possible aujourd'hui que, par exemple, en avril, pour les gens de travailler. Et c'est une bonne chose. Et c'était nécessaire d'adapter nos programmes. Mais je veux vraiment dire que c'est seulement une étape.
It's just one step,
and
we are very aware that we have much more to do.
Comment est-ce que cette réforme de l'assurance-emploi est plus équitable pour les travailleurs et toutes ces nouvelles prestations là, sont plus efficaces pour relancer l'économie?
Je pense que c'est pour Carla.
Franchement, les changements de l'assurance-emploi sont plus inclusifs. Et beaucoup plus de personnes, de travailleurs vont avoir accès aux prestations d'assurance d'emploi. les autres prestations que nous créons vont être plus parallèles, vont être plus proches au système d'assurance emploi. Alors, on a fait notre mieux possible pour que les deux systèmes travaillent ensemble, qu'ils se semblent le plus que possible. Il y a un système dans l'assurance emploi où on peut work well on claim. On va avoir la même chose pour les nouvelles prestations. Les montants vont être pareils. Alors, pour moi, comme ministre, c'est très important qu'il y ait l'équité pour tous les travailleurs et que nous avons le plus nombre de travailleurs possible dans le système d'assurance emploi. Ce n'est pas un système parfait, mais c'est le système que nous avons. Et c'est beaucoup mieux qu'un système, n'importe quel nouvel système que nous pouvons créer dans 1, 2, 3, 4 semaines. Oui.
Yes.
Sure. Let me just think. Sorry. Yeah, basically what I said was we worked really hard to make employment insurance system more inclusive. So the most number of workers we could get into the system, we wanted to pull into the system for some really important reasons. Firstly, because it's the only system we have, and it has some aspects to it that will address the concerns that people had around CERB. Working well on claim, you have to show and prove that you're available for work. The disincentivizing criticisms of CERB don't exist in EI. Access to training, work sharing possibilities, for all of its need for reform, it's way better than any system we can put in place in 3, 4, 5 weeks during a pandemic crisis. At the same time, we wanted to make sure there was equity amongst and between workers who, no matter our best efforts, and even at 120 hours threshold, people still can't get into EI. So we don't want to leave them behind. And so we've created these parallel benefits with a lot of the same characteristics of the EI system. The closest we could get, to be honest, in the time we had to design and develop this to EI, there'll be an aspect of working well on claim like treatment of earned income. Will be able to, because it's a 2-week benefit, monitor more closely people's availability to work. At tax time, we'll be able to verify income and make sure people had the $5,000 they said they earned last year. There's a lot. We've learned a lot from the CERB and from the student benefit, and I think you'll see those things reflected in the design of these new benefits. And I'm very proud of how hard the public service has worked to create this for Canadians.
Thank you. That will end today's press conference.